Well, if we follow the analogy that Jed just gave us about classic television and likening back to the old television show Gunsmoke, I'm Festus Hagen. I don't come as an academic or as a scholar. I come as a tour guide and an educator. And I come to represent those who travel to the places that you study and write about. My passion, my job, what I do, at least in part, is to gather people up and take them safely to the places that interest them, and then somehow try to figure out a way that I can emotionally connect these people to the place they want to see or find the ancestor they're looking for. I want them to walk away in love with the place that they see. I feel a loyalty, whether that be a church history site or the docks at Liverpool. I want them to be connected. I want them to love the place. Some places are harder than others to fall in love with. For some of the people that I take out when I go out on tour, it is a lifetime investment to be there. And I don't take that lightly. So when I take people out, it is with great respect and reverence that I take them there. Now, this conference is attended by historians, museum curators, academics of various disciplines, all scholars, and I feel a great respect for what you do, even if you're amateur historians, because it's from you that I learn, and it's from you I draw my material when I take people out on a place. I scour the histories that you write. I use the trail guides. I take them to the visitor centers and the museums. I draw so heavily on the work of these scholars, and I have profound respect for them. Now, a couple of principles I'll share with you about what I've learned about taking people out on tour. The first, all people inherently search for identity. They want to know who they are. Who am I? Where did I come from? I grew up not as a religious person in a non-religious home. My grandmother called me a heathen. That fits. But I used to ask my dad all the time, who was a salty old cowboy, "Dad, where did I come from?" He had two classic answers. "Well, boy, we found you under a rock." His other answer was, "Well, you come from a long line of horse thieves." Now, that's really a sense of heritage right there. People search for their identity. They search for their heritage. That's why they travel. Generally, and again, there are exceptions to every rule, but a second principle is this. Generally, those who love history the most are those who are about to be history. The elderly, the older. No insult intended. But we find, at least as I'm traveling, that predominantly the age group that wants to go out and travel and visit church history sites are those who are much older. Their hair is silver and gray or non-existent at all. For example, just recently I've spent a good part of the summer out on the trail in Wyoming. We pull up to Independence Rock. I've got 45, 50 people on a bus. I've got one family and a young man by the name of Rock. He's 15. We pull up to Independence Rock, and I take a moment to tell them the historical, personal significance of that rock, the great register of the desert, with 40,000 to 50,000 pioneer names on it. And as soon as I opened that door, Rock was off that bus like a bolt. And in 5 minutes, from door bus to the top of the rock, he was standing on Independence Rock. Why did he come there? To set the world record for climbing Independence Rock. He didn't care a pinch of snuff over the history or the names on the rock. How do you take history and sites and connect it to young people? Older people, and I'm only being a little bit facetious, care about their history. They care about their heritage. They care about these sites because there is a sense as we age that we're about to meet Grandpa and give an accounting. Third thing, from my experience as a tour educator and guide, people travel for a sensory experience. For example, they want to see the unfathomable ice of Antarctica or the fjords of Norway. They want to smell the flowers of the South Pacific or the sage of Wyoming. Some people want to taste the cuisine, the pastries of Paris, the haggis of Scotland. Can't imagine that one. They want to hear the roar of Iguazu Falls or others. But for the people I take, the sensory experience that they want is they want to feel. They want to connect with the experiences, with their family on the trail. It isn't this kind of a feel. It's this. And that's why they come. They want to feel something. And in that feeling that they want to experience, you already know this, but they may come and they may hear a great recitation on the history of that place, the dates, the facts, the places, all of that. But you know, and I know, especially when you travel, it's what you feel that you take home. The dates and the facts will all leak out, but what you feel is remembered. And that's oftentimes why they travel. There are exceptions, but when we're talking about church history sites across Iowa or anywhere else, people come to connect. They want to feel something. They want me as a tour educator to give meaning to their past. Now, sometimes the people are coming out to learn the history. For example, just a couple of weeks ago, I was out here with a small tour group. I was standing at the door of the Kanesville Tabernacle. I couldn't go in for obvious reasons, if you know. And so while we're standing there, Brother Bennett and I, Dick Bennett and I, told my little group the story of Brigham Young and the experience at Orson Hyde, or at Hyde Park and Orson Hyde's home, and the reorganization of the First Presidency and the great revelation that brought that forth. And then we went on with our tour. It was a 2-week tour. When we got home, the highlight of that entire tour was that moment and that personal story about Brigham Young and the reorganization of the First Presidency. That moment of history changed that man's life. That man happens to own a tour company, and now, from now on to however long, every group he's going to send out is going to come through Kanesville because he connected in a moment and a place with a story he'd never heard before that changed his life. Imagine standing on the site. You read section 128, courage, brethren, and on to the victory. And that story, that magnificent statement from Joseph Smith the prophet takes on whole new meaning when you go to Edward Hunter's home in Nauvoo, and you crawl up into that attic, that little crawl space where he wrote it. That changes the history. It makes it connects it. It makes it more personal. And this happens to me all over the world. People have grown up hearing about the story of the Titanic, but until you stand in the museum in Belfast and see where the Titanic went down the waves, the story isn't as real. That same tour I mentioned a moment ago, I'm at Hans Mill. I've got 5, 6, 7 people gathered around me, and I tell the story of Hans Mill. And standing there, listening to that, is the third great-granddaughter of Amanda Barnes Smith. Can you imagine how that made her feel? A few days ago, I'm standing at the Green River Crossing, and I tell the story of William Atkin and his miraculous crossing of the green. And there's his second great-granddaughter standing right there as I tell that story. And I could go on. Wendy's comment about Thomas Bullock's journal and the crossing of Iowa, and she mentioned that 2 women died. One of those women mentioned in Bullock's journal is Joan Campbell. And one day while reading that journal, I found that story. And I told that story. And lo and behold, in the audience listening is one of her descendants. And because I, not a member of the family, go to a spot and tell them about their grandmother, they never forget. There wells up inside of them a feeling that somebody cares about my ancestor. And I don't know whether you want to call it pride or satisfaction or whatever stirs your mush, but the feeling is they don't forget because somebody else knows about my great-grandmother. Right here in Iowa, Joan Campbell, John Cox, my own grandfather joined the Mormon Battalion right here, Catherine Curtis Spencer at Keosauqua, Freeman Nickerson along the Sheridan River, and not the least, Newell Knight, Lydia Knight, and Jesse Knight at Fort Ponca, just across the river and up to the north of us. Every one of these places are filled with people. And yes, we need to tell them the story, the facts, the dates, but these places are all made by people who were here. And my people want to know about their people on these places. They want to know how their people contributed to the history. And as I think I heard Elder Curtis mention, it's these little people that aren't the big people in church. They're not Brigham Young. They're not Heber Kimball. Sometimes they're little people like Lyman Andrus Shurtleff. And their ancestors have a great deal of satisfaction when we talk about them at these places. For my people that I travel with, these sites bring the history to life. They not only teach it, but they illustrate it. I mean, okay, this is a really... I go out on the trail, and I tell my people as I'm traveling that one of the great fears of the pioneers was wolves. And in their mind, they're thinking coyote. And I'm trying to say to them, the pioneers were deathly afraid of wolves. And because there's no wolves out there in the middle of Wyoming now, they don't get it until I walk into the Sun Ranch building at the Visitor Center at Martin's Cove, and there hangs a wolf skin on the wall that's almost as tall as a man. And suddenly, whoa, they get it. These sites and the way they're presented teach in unmistakable ways. You can talk about 400,000 people crossing the Oregon Trail, but when you stand at the ruts at Guernsey that are cut in some places more than 5 feet deep, all of a sudden the concept of traffic across this trail becomes real and meaningful to my people. They see it, they get it. These sites, these church history sites, are places of deep conversion, strength, power. These sites, I cannot tell you how many people I have taken all over the world and stood at sites, not just LDS church history sites, but sites that have meaning to them, and watched them weep. Can you imagine walking over Rocky Ridge, Wyoming, and having someone explain or tell you the story of James and Joseph Kirkwood, the brother who carried his little brother over that pass on that fateful day and then reached camp, collapsed, and died? Or walk them out to Locust Creek, Iowa, and show them the place where William Clayton wrote, "Come, come, ye saints." And then explain that he wrote that in the spirit of rejoicing in this wilderness camp. And then you might happen to add, and yet so many people today, when they sing that anthem of the pioneers, sing it like it's a funeral dirge. But that's not how William Clayton wrote it. That's not where or why he wrote it. My people love the sights when they know the spirit and stories of that place. If I don't tell them the story, they don't get it. For example, just a few days ago, I brought a group to Casper, Wyoming. I drove right past Red Buttes, and I watched the reaction of my group, some of which, like I said, their hair is your color, just to see if they would react. Went right on by, didn't say a word. Right on by Bessemer's Bend, Red Buttes Camp, didn't say a word. Following morning, I took them out to Bessemer's Bend and in full view of Red Buttes Camp, and I taught them the story there. I shared the story of the Martin Company and 56 people lying dead over that stretch of river between the last crossing and Red Buttes. And all of a sudden, what they had missed the day before, tears are flowing down their cheeks. They will never forget Red Buttes. Not because of me, but because of the story, what that happened there. Tell me the story. Share with me the people, the human interest side of this. This has happened to me everywhere I've gone. And not only that, you can do everything you want to preserve a site and set up a site, but it's the stories we tell about it that will interpret that site. For example, Chad, how much time do I have left? I lost track. 3 minutes? Okay. Edinburgh, Scotland is one of the richest places on earth for culture and history and fascinating things to see. So diverse. And yet, the most popular statue in Edinburgh, Scotland is a little Scotty dog that sits right downtown. Every visitor comes to Edinburgh, nearly every visitor comes to Edinburgh, and they have to go and get their pictures taken with this little statue of the dog. He's called Greyfriars Bobby. He is one of the most beloved stories in Scotland, and he is one of the most famous pieces of artwork, and he paints the scene of what Edinburgh really is. He's the story of a little dog who was owned by an old security guard. The old man dies and is buried in Greyfriars Kirk Cemetery. And for the next 12 to 15 years, I don't remember the exact number, that little dog every day sleeps on the grave of his master and will not leave. And he lives out the rest of his days right there on his master's grave. And every person who comes to Edinburgh hears that story, and they walk out of Edinburgh in love with that city, because that's the feeling they take home. So I conclude with this, my friends. To historians, to site curators, to museum curators, all of you that are involved in this marvelous research, even the missionaries who are telling the story where you are, tell me the story of that place. Share with me the facts and the figures, but please, if you can tell me about my people, I will never forget. Thank you.
Is that on? We're grateful for our presenters. We have about 5 minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions, for those who are watching by Zoom, we can see your questions if you submit them on chat, and we'll try to answer those. Any questions? Anything else you would?
Why don't you read some of the questions that have come in?
Well, these are, the last question we had, the last question we had was for the previous. So I was waiting to see if something had come in. But we actually have just noticed here from Chile, we've had somebody in attendance, Canada, South Africa, Elder, and Seattle, so. All right, well, our panelists will be available for, did I see a question there?
Not a question, just an announcement. Lunch.
Yeah.
Outdoors, picnic area, just down the sidewalk at 12 o'clock. And it's nice barbecue lunch, hamburgers, and hot dogs, or salads, whatever you want. And that'll go from 12 till 1 o'clock.
Okay.
We appreciate cash, if you got cash. I can't take cards, I just want to go inside and pay.
Okay.
Start in just a few minutes.
All right, yeah, lunch will start here in just a few minutes, and the next session will begin at 1:15 here Central Time. So thank you for your attendance, and let's give our presenters another round of applause.